morning. I'm good. Come right up here, and if you could just stand behind the chair to start with. Right.
Absolutely.
Raise your right hand, please.
Yes.
Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Now, before we begin, you anticipated my first request, which is to keep your mask off. It just that it'll be easier to hear you. If you feel a need that you got to put it back on, feel free. But
thank you.
The important thing is that we be able to hear you, and so what we're going to do is start to make sure we can hear you. We're going to have you state your full name, spell each of your names.
Okay. My name is Courtney, Courteney, Batya, Batya, Ross, Ross.
Thank you. Mr. Prank.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Ross, can you just tell the jurors, not your address, but generally where you live?
Yes, I live in Northeast Minneapolis.
How long have you been in the Northeast Minneapolis area?
My entire life. I was born and raised.
And can you tell the jurors how old you are?
I'm 45 years old.
Seems like a strange question. There is a reason for it.
It's okay.
So. And do you have any children?
I have 2 boys.
Okay. And Miss Ross, did you know George Floyd?
Yes.
When did you meet George Floyd?
I met Floyd in August of 2017.
And you refer to him as Floyd?
All the time.
That's how you just refer to him all the time?
Yes.
And, in court we prefer to use Mr. Floyd. So as much as you can, do that, but I understand Floyd is just how you knew him, right?
Sure.
All right. And so when was it that you first met Mr. Floyd?
May I tell the story?
Sure.
Okay. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. Excuse me.
And Ms. Ross, so you know, if you feel like you need to just take a moment to collect yourself, feel free. We're in no rush here.
Thank
right?
you.
Yeah.
In August of 2017, I had gotten off work one night. I worked at a coffee shop for 22 years now, part-time. And I was tired and I just cleaned up and closed up the shop, and I went to go visit my son's father, who was staying at Harbor Lights, the Salvation Army shelter. He had some difficulties and was staying there. I entered Harbor Lights, and when you visit there, you have to ask for a person to come down if you're visiting them. And so I had the receptionist call him down, but he didn't seem to be coming down, so I waited in the lobby, and I wanted to talk to him about our son's birthday. Excuse me. I was pretty upset, and I started kind of fussing in the corner of the lobby. And at one point, Floyd came up to me. And Floyd has this great, deep Southern voice, raspy. He's like, sis, you okay, sis? And I wasn't okay. I said, no, I'm just waiting for my son's father. He said, well, can I pray with you? I thought I was so tired. We had been through so much, my sons and I. And this kind person just to come up to me and say, can I pray with you? When I felt alone in this lobby, it was so sweet. And at the time, I had lost a lot of faith in God.
Ms. Ross, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm just going to want to maybe help with a few questions, okay?
Sure.
At that point, did you know what Mr. Floyd was doing there at the Salvation Army?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. He worked there as a security guard.
Okay. And so he came up to you and tried to comfort you?
Yes.
And was that the beginning of your relationship?
Well, not that part. That was just Floyd. Afterwards, he had asked me who my son's father was, and I said, you know, we're co-parent and we're not in a relationship. And that's when I like to say his voice dropped like 2 levels, even though it was deep already. And he asked me if he could get my number, and we had our first kiss in the lobby. And that's when our relationship started.
And after that, how close did you become?
We were very close.
And so I'm not sure you told us when this was. Do you recall roughly, not the date, but the year at least?
In August of 2017.
Okay. And up until his death, did you continue to be in a relationship with him?
Yes.
Can you describe, how often you saw each other during those 3 years?
Just about every day we saw each other, as much as we possibly could.
Were there times when you weren't as close as other times?
We had, sometimes just like all couples, we argued sometimes and, might have taken a break, but...
Like most couples?
But like most couples, I assume.
Did you learn, whether he was new to Minneapolis?
Oh, yeah. On our first date, like most people do, we went over like our histories, and he told me he was from Houston.
And what kinds of things did the two of you do together when you get together and do things?
Floyd was new to the city, so everything was kind of new to him. Everywhere we went was new to him. He made it seem like, I was new to my own city. So we like to go to, he lived right by Lake Bede-Makaska. We like to go down there a lot and, enjoy the outdoors. We like to go to the sculpture garden and just, walk around. We went out to eat a lot.
Why?
Because Lloyd loved to eat a lot. He's a big man, and it took a lot of energy to keep him going. And he loved food, and so did I. It was fun. It was an adventure always with him.
Did you know where he was working? Prior to his death, had he been working someplace?
Yes, he was working at Conga.
What is
Latin Bistro?
Okay. What is that?
Conga is a restaurant, but also a nightclub. In the evening.
What did he do there?
He was a security guard. He was head of security there.
And did he at some point lose that job?
Only because of COVID. I mean, it shut down because of COVID.
And you had met at Salvation Army. Did you, learn eventually that he worked there?
Yes, I knew that evening that he worked at the Salvation Army.
And he was a security guard there?
Yes.
And at some point that job ended, correct?
Yes. I think that maybe a year or so after I met him.
And in the time period leading up to his death in May of last year, let's talk about January to May when he passed. How often were the two of you seeing each other?
Of 2020?
Yes.
At the beginning of the year, we had not seen each other, kind of separated for a little while, but from March until May, we spent every day together.
And we have a photograph of Mr. Floyd. I believe we showed that to you in a prior meeting with you, correct?
Yes.
And you recognize that as him?
Yes.
All right. And you're going to read off for Exhibit 247?
247 is received.
Look that up. So I'm showing you Exhibit 247.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. See, if you touch the screen, it's going to write on there, so sorry. You familiar with this photograph?
Yes.
What kind of photograph is this?
I would call it a dad selfie.
And why would you call it that?
I'm just joking, but a lot of dads sometimes don't have the best angle. When they take selfies, it's kind of lower and it just don't take the time to maybe do the certain angles that everybody else does.
And so this is you believe, a selfie that he took?
Yes.
All right.
I believe it was outside of the Salvation Army.
Do you recall about roughly when this was taken?
From the sweater he was wearing, I think it was the fall of 2017.
Did Mr. Floyd have any children?
Yes.
How many children did he have?
2 girls.
And did he try to be a part of their lives as much as he could?
Yes, he loved his girls. It was hard being in Minnesota, long distance, but...
So his daughters were not in Minnesota? Is that, no?
No.
I want to make sure that your voice is loud enough for everybody to hear. At some point, when you knew Mr. Floyd, did you learn of his mother's death?
Yes.
Did you recall when that was?
It was in May 2018.
And did you see, describe, if you would, for the jury, what you saw his reaction to his mother's death.
Pardon me. Floyd's what I would call a mama's boy. I could tell from the minute I met him. And when he came back from Houston, he seemed kind of like a shell of himself. Like he was broken. He seemed so sad. He didn't have the same kind of bounce that he had. devastated. He loved his mom so much, and I knew that. He talked about her all the time. I knew how he felt. It's so hard to lose a parent that you love like that.
Ms. Ross, thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll see if I can ask some questions to help a little, okay? So he struggled with grief over his mother's death?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay. And going to change topics a bit, okay?
Okay.
All right. You need a minute? Are you okay?
I'm okay. I can do it.
You met Mr. Floyd at Salvation Army,
Yes.
and then proceeded to maintain a relationship with him.
Yes.
And I have to ask you if drug use was a part of that relationship.
Yes.
And what kind of drug use was a part of that relationship?
Floyd and I both suffered with an opioid addiction.
And do you know how, like for your own self,
Yeah.
how you came to be involved, with what kind of drugs and how you became
The use of
involved?
opioids, yes. Both Floyd and I, our story, it's a classic story of how many people get addicted to opioids. We both suffered from chronic pain. Mine was in my neck and his was in his back. We both had prescriptions. But after prescriptions that were filled and we got addicted and tried really hard to break that addiction many times.
And were you each aware of each other's struggles with opioids?
Yes, eventually in our relationship we shared that.
And did you sort of work together on that issue?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And over how long of a period did this struggle go on for you, for both of you?
Addiction, in my opinion, is a lifelong struggle. So it's something that we dealt with every day. It's not something that just kind of comes and goes. It's something I'll deal with forever.
And were there periods of time when you were not using opioids?
Absolutely.
And same question with regard to Mr. Floyd.
Yes, absolutely.
And were there times when you knew that he was using opioids more than by prescription?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And when you weren't using, prescription opioids, where did you get them?
Off the street.
Okay.
On the black market.
And you knew that he was doing that as well.
Yes.
And turning your attention to, well, let me ask this. You were in a relationship for nearly 3 years.
Yes.
And did this use of opioids beyond even prescriptions sort of continue throughout that 3-year period for Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
And it's something that you saw yourself and were aware of.
Yes.
And I have to ask the same question of you. Did you struggle using during that entire period?
Yes.
And were there times when you would use together?
Yes.
And for what you saw Mr. Floyd using, what form of opioids did he typically use?
Oxycontin or oxycodone and any kind of oxy.
And how did he get that? How did he use it?
Swallow them?
And so in pill form?
Yes. Sorry.
That's right. Not the easiest question to ask, for you. So I'm sorry.
It's
If
okay.
you ever don't understand my question, feel free to ask.
Okay.
Or let me know. Okay. And so there were times when you would obtain non-prescription opiate pills together.
Yes, there would be other people's prescriptions.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
They would be other people's prescriptions.
And were there some times, well, why would you get them through other people's prescriptions? What do you mean?
To make sure they were safe.
And were there times then that you had to get pills other than, from what you knew were somebody else's prescriptions?
Yes.
And were there times when you thought that maybe Mr. Floyd wasn't using, or was using, but not with you, not in your presence?
Yes. There was a time.
And were there times when you were using together, well, I guess that's a poorly worded question already. Let me just ask it this way. Did you use the same amounts when you used?
Yes.
And taking your attention to March of 2020, and there was a time in March when you knew he was back to using pills. Is that right?
I thought his behavior had changed.
Okay. And what do you mean by that?
I think when you know someone who suffers with any type of addiction, you can start to kind of see changes when they're using again. And there's just slight behavioral changes that I noticed in him, and it just made me suspect.
And in March of 2020, did you also kind of fall back into using
Yes,
some?
I did.
So and were you two using together back in March, or you just suspected his use?
In March, yes, we did use together.
And was there a period then after March where you thought the two of you had both been able to quit for a while?
Yes, a long period.
And then kind of going forward to May of 2020, was there a time when you thought he might be using again?
Yes.
So in May, when you thought that, what led you to think that?
It was the same type of thing. Just behavior changes in Floyd.
And did you also kind of fall back to using opioids in May of 2020?
One time, yes.
And he was aware of that?
Yes.
And when he well, let me ask you this, I guess. In May of 2020, did you know where he was living? Just the general area.
Yes. Yes.
Did he have his own place where he stayed?
Yes, he lived in a place in St. Louis Park,
Yeah.
side by side.
Did he have roommates there?
Yes, two.
Did the two of you ever live together?
No, we stayed at each other's places, but we didn't live together.
So in May of 2020, do you recall the last time you spoke with him?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was in relation to his death?
It was the day before he died.
And how did you talk to him? Like by phone? Okay. And did you know what he was going to be doing that night, or where he was going to be staying?
That night I knew he said he was going to be staying at Sylvia's.
Did you know who Sylvia was?
Yes, she's a friend of ours.
And so as far as you knew, he was going to be staying at a friend's house, Sylvia.
Yes.
And do you recall him saying what the plan was for why they were going to Sylvia's?
Well, Floyd had, made his Minneapolis family here too, and a lot of the people that he was friends with were from other